Our tale commences during a solar eclipse. Under its tranquil glow, humankind undergoes a radical metamorphosis. Some observe their skin and flesh transforming into foliage and timber, resembling arboreal undead. Others find metal erupting from their bones, like casualties of a catastrophic construction mishap. These individuals, along with other senseless humans altered by an enigmatic agent, wander the terrain amidst the chaotic proliferation of this unparalleled catastrophe. One can only ponder, is there still solace and tranquility in this terrifying realm? Even our protagonist contemplates why he remains so unperturbed and nonchalant under these conditions. It's as if he's unafraid of those creatures known as Darksiders. The explanation is straightforward. He, too, has undergone a transformation, albeit not in the conventional manner. He's become a patch of earth in a secluded forest. He struggles to comprehend his preposterous destiny. How will he traverse anywhere if he's presently an inert mound of earth and soil? All the others maintain some semblance of human characteristics. It's as though he's the sole anomaly. Our lad kicks out a foot in exasperation, and the ground beneath a Darksider erupts skyward. The unfortunate fellow, engulfed in foliage, stumbles over the unforeseen protuberance. This results in Tree Guy's face being impaled on the protruding rebar. Jutting from another Darksider's back, a jet of black fluid begins to seep from Tree Guy's forehead. A gash that would prove lethal to ordinary humans is evident. He seeks a scapegoat, and that happens to be Steel Guy. Though incomprehensible, the fury in his grumbling is palpable. Our protagonist, essentially the catalyst for this altercation, swiftly absolves himself of any culpability, attributing the squabble to the Darksider's volatile temperament, metamorphosed or otherwise. It appears others are entirely oblivious to his presence. His senses and mental state are deteriorating. It's as if he's regressing into an inanimate object. Overall, this metamorphosis is practically a death sentence. Resigned to his unfortunate circumstances, he lies down submissively, bidding farewell to this ravaged world. Not far from where he surrenders to despair, a woman is fleeing for her life. A charming, green-haired student appears panicked. After a prolonged escape from monstrous creatures, she's beginning to question the existence of any ordinary humans. Her flight leads her to the very spot where our protagonist awaits his demise. He glimpses a reason to live beneath her skirt. Indeed, his mental state is progressively declining, but a peek at her backside could remedy any psychological ailment. He recognizes the futility of passively awaiting death. It's time to rise again. Overcome with excitement, he inadvertently trips someone above him. Once more, the charming young woman takes a tumble. It's a rather rough landing indeed. Our protagonist is frozen. The girl seems unharmed, but he's struck by a sudden epiphany. This feeling is one of humanity's three fundamental desires. His heart overflows with elation. It's a remnant of life, a testament to his existence. Even in this grounded state, emotions remind him of his humanity. As he contemplates the beauty of human intricacies, the girl struggles to her feet. Being unexpectedly injured is an unpleasant ordeal. To worsen matters, menacing figures begin to encircle them. The metal and wooden darklings cease their squabble, focusing on a shared, vulnerable prey. They may have clashed moments ago, but exploiting a defenseless individual takes precedence. She realizes escape is impossible at this proximity. The woman's only recourse is a scream, as loud as she can possibly bellow. Our hero finally snaps out of his reverie. Commanding the earth with his power, he directs his fingers downwards. The ground beneath the Darksider pair abruptly collapses before they can get to the maiden. He dislikes these creatures thrashing and yelling directly into him without his consent, clenching his fists and manipulating the soil to seal the opening. He aims to teach them a lesson. Darksiders aren't permitted to lay a hand on ordinary humans. The chasm that ensnared the mindless horde begins to crush them, gradually engulfing their bodies further into the earth. There must have been a misjudgment. Darksiders who have acclimated to their metamorphoses are formidable. These two wield substantial power and the resilience to escape their earthen prison. It's a brutal struggle that fractures all of our protagonist's fingers. He might be impervious to pain, but these adversaries could inflict actual harm. A dark entity possessed by a deceased tree, and another that morphed into steel rebar. These two are formidable opponents. To effectively subdue them, he must proceed with greater delicacy and caution. His first priority is to escort the woman to safety. He creates a makeshift descending pathway, manipulating the terrain's elevation. After relocating her to a more secure location, he implements further safeguards, utilizing the overhead earth as concealment. The woman is astonished. The surrounding soil flows with an almost liquid consistency, like quicksand, yet it seems to actively shield and safeguard her. The notion of the earth assisting her is preposterous, but they live in extraordinary times. Amidst these circumstances, our protagonist has made several observations. The earth remains silent, not requiring attention. But this doesn't imply he's lost his human compassion. As a shadowy figure emerges, he triumphantly proclaims this will be his domain. For the first time since transforming into terra firma, he embodies the territory itself. The two behemoths seem to have detected his presence. His animosity, his aggression compels the metal and arboreal giants to assault the very ground. They launch a pathetic attack with feeble, conventional blows that appear utterly ineffective. Darksiders like this duo are truly the bottom tier, metamorphosed creatures devoid of reason. They haven't the slightest comprehension of the Earth's immense density and weight. A tree trunk halts after leaving a negligible mark. Reinforced steel approaches, but even its robust composition fails to penetrate. Now they're essentially helpless targets, their primary armaments embedded in the unyielding ground. To handle such imbeciles, simply manipulating the Earth's mass should suffice. He concentrates the Earth's density within his grasps. Our hero obliterates their armaments, sending them hurtling through the air. The sheer force of the impact predetermines their landing spot. This duo is returning to the previously excavated grave. After plummeting into the deep chasm, our protagonist denies them any chance of escape. The Earth seals shut instantaneously, and moments later, it's as if the darkness and the menacing fissure never existed. Being one with the land, he believes enduring the darkness and actively combating harm is his responsibility. He performed a valiant act today, but the individual he rescued, the young woman emerging from his makeshift sanctuary, must flee this location at the earliest chance. His presence remains undetectable. After all, it's a desolate and solitary existence. He yearns to see what reignited his will to live. He longs to remember the sensation of being human. His reverie is momentarily broken by the woman's voice. She courteously requests his attention. She inches her way to his conscious mind and inquires if he is her deliverer. Incredulous, he wonders if she can perceive him, if she can sense his ethereal form. She in fact cannot. Or rather, she wouldn't precisely describe it as seeing. She simply seems capable of sensing his presence. From her perspective, whenever he was near, a profound feeling of safety enveloped the area and the surroundings. Since transforming into a landmass, he feels acknowledged for the first time. Feeling seen and heard, he grasps her hand, as if terrified of losing contact. The young man doesn't hesitate. He bluntly proposes she remain and reside upon it. Her reaction is typical of anyone presented with such an outlandish suggestion. He identifies himself as Lee Chang-yun. He happened to be traversing this wooded area when the metamorphosis took place. Consequently, he literally became a part of the terrain. Based on his current understanding, secure locations no longer exist in the world. Ever since the eclipse occurred, the Darksiders have seized control and are assaulting ordinary people everywhere. However, Lee Chung-yun retains his human cognitive abilities. He's also capable of sufficiently safeguarding the woman. It would be easy for her to be ambushed wandering alone. She requires someone to guarantee her well-being from now on. He may have presented some legitimate arguments, but those are merely pretexts. There's a single, crucial reason he doesn't want her to leave. It's because she provided Lee Chung-yun with renewed purpose in life. He desires for her to also have a reason to remain. He implores her to stay by his side. His sudden, rapid speech makes it challenging for her to grasp everything. He blurts out a few words, vowing to provide for and protect her. Now, his intentions are much clearer. Her name is Luluo. She senses the genuineness in each of Lechenjian's words. Furthermore, she requires a safer haven from the menacing dark forces. He interprets this as an acceptance of his offer. It's time to locate a sanctuary impervious to dark forces. However, she first observes something worrisome. She detects a peculiar feeling in his right hand and inquires if there's an issue. Even Lachinjian himself hasn't noticed it yet, but his right hand is beginning to wither and contract. It feels as though something is being extracted from him, and his hand exhibits signs of depletion. He extends his senses throughout his body and perceives an unusual plant. Its tendrils extended beneath his skin. This ominous violet flora, exhibiting an extraordinary pace of growth, could be a malevolent entity unlike any he'd encountered. The pair endeavored to advance toward the enigmatic plant, but Li Chengyi's energy reserves were rapidly depleting. Visibly concerned, Lulu inquired about his well-being. Naturally, he feigned strength, despite feeling utterly drained. The perpetrator must be siphoning his energy somehow, and he was certain they were proceeding in the correct direction. She paused briefly. A notion materialized within her mind, though its accuracy remained uncertain. Without warning, Lulu inserted 2 fingers into his mouth, silencing him with astonishment. It felt divine, so incredibly blissful it seemed surreal. Having a cute girl's fingers in his mouth was an extraordinary sensation, but there was an additional element to its enchantment. In mere moments, the energy depleted from his body was replenished. His complexion also improved, appearing healthier. The magic didn't originate from Lulu's fingertips. It stemmed from the nutrients she provided him. It was a desperate gamble, but it proved successful. Given his prior state of near-fatal energy depletion, there was no opportunity for clarification. As a student from a neighboring agricultural college, she hastily gathered whatever provisions she could before fleeing. She hadn't anticipated their immediate usefulness. She actually lost most of the supplies during her escape, but she retrieved them on her return journey. Lulu was carrying a hefty bag of urea, a substance Li Chengyue was completely unfamiliar with. He expressed his sincere gratitude for rescuing him from the verge of utter exhaustion. Perhaps she was his unexpected savior. However, the fertilizer's effects were fleeting. His hands began to wither again, resembling those of an elderly man. The issue remained unresolved. They need to locate the origin swiftly before time runs out. Judging by Li Yin's weakened tremors, they're running critically low on time. After a period, they finally arrive near the enigmatic plant. The pair opts to cautiously observe the situation from behind the foliage. As a safety measure, this small, violet plant, merely centimeters in length, possessed the ability to absorb Li Yin's essence. At an alarming pace, Lulu had never encountered anything like this flora in her academic studies. A frightening hypothesis would be that plants can also become corrupted by darkness. That notion holds considerable weight. However, Li Yin was supposedly an expansive landmass, so how could a single stem, thinner than an arm, drain him completely? Perhaps it's time to test its resilience and uncover its concealed secrets. Li Yin exerted control over the earth surrounding the plant, contorting the terrain around its base. The violet flora emitted a tooting noise upon sensing a disturbance in the terrain, becoming aware of the unfolding events. The lavender plant promptly extracted itself, exposing a multitude of ghastly orbs. These riddled its enormous and intricate root network. Each sphere appeared more repulsive than the one before, particularly toward the core. He deduced that these were likely massive growths, proliferating along the roots. Furthermore, the roots themselves possessed remarkable resilience. Not even the Earth's might could shatter them. Lulu classified these as rhizobia, affixed to the roots of a leguminous species. Rhizobia facilitate the plant's absorption of atmospheric nitrogen. Essentially, they share a symbiotic partnership with the plant. This signifies that even if it ceased drawing sustenance from him, it would already be self-reliant. The Earth's energy proves futile against the resilient roots. He could conjure no other weapon in his arsenal to provide assistance. Now that the vegetation has detected their presence, their only recourse is to evade the relentless root assaults. As it exposes more of its root network above ground, several bodies emerge alongside them. It's the remains of the tree and iron bar dark cider that Li Cheng interred earlier. It seems they're destined to become nourishment for the enigmatic plant, but that proves untrue. According to Li Cheng-yi, an aura emanates from the dark ciders, imperceptible to ordinary individuals. This energy, flowing from the corpses, moves steadily towards the plant itself. After consuming this mysterious force, the distinctive features of a dark cider fully manifest. Where the flower's pistil should be, along with its grotesquely large rhizome. The entity has transformed into a genuine monstrous aberration. A complete darksider, it emits another one of those toot sounds, before readying a root for an assault. The root had a sharpened point, and moved with astonishing velocity. Its target was Lulua's heart. Our earthbound friend wouldn't allow that. He leaped in front of her, interposing his own body as a shield. It punctured his rocky form, fracturing his chest into fragments. It appeared dire, but at least the girl was unharmed. That impressive piercing force surpasses even the two human shadow figures he interred earlier. Lulu witnessed the deadly natural weapon puncture him, and felt powerless. The plant prepared to follow its piercing strike with a crushing blow, utilizing the thick nodules. He urged her to flee while she still could. Then, the bulbous mass descended from above. Leech and geese rapidly disintegrated, succumbing to the blunt impact. Once again, it may appear dire, but these superficial wounds won't be fatal. However, considering the overwhelming disadvantage, this won't endure. His only recourse was to buy the woman time to escape. He implored her a second time, asserting that this was his private affair. If Lua becomes entangled in this madness, how could he speak of safeguarding her and sharing a life? His sincere emotions resonated deeply within her. Yet, she remained rooted to the spot. He bellowed one final time, warning her against underestimating a Darksider's assault. His cries seemed to go unheard. For root-like appendages lunged toward the stationary young woman. She reacted by retrieving vials filled with a verdant fluid from her horticultural satchel and drenching the plant's roots with it. The botanical entity was startled, and a burning sensation emanated from its saturated roots. It emitted a piercing shriek as the tendrils intended to eliminate the young woman rapidly withered and disintegrated. While Lulua lacks extensive knowledge of Darksiders, she recognizes that this particular plant they're confronting possesses an exceptionally potent absorption capability. Therefore, she opted to deploy a concentrated dose of industrial-strength herbicide for the adversary to ingest. This is a novel, undiluted solution, making it among the most potent available. Beneath the perpetual twilight, the plant's roots rapidly deteriorated, until everything crumbled and turned to dust. The concentrated herbicide absorbed through its roots swiftly coursed through its entire system, neutralizing its formerly formidable defenses. What remained was a solitary flower stalk, plummeting to the earth. Mere moments ago, this creature was emitting some ominous, low-pitched noises, and now it's trembling pathetically. The sole rationalization was that it had somehow forfeited its combative spirit, following a colossal defeat. Lulu has also found tranquility now that the noisy entity has yielded. Indeed, she's already christened the flower. Toot Toot raised its head and gingerly lifted its own fruit as a gesture of peace. Li Changqing maintained his guard. The entity before them was still a creature of darkness. It's impossible to fathom the thoughts of such beings. The young woman wasn't entirely convinced of its safety. She may be unfamiliar with dark creatures, but she's always enjoyed the company of plants. In contrast to the metamorphosed humans, Toot Toot's intentions were more readily discernible. The guileless expression on the flower's face was quite revealing. It bore no ill will. To further demonstrate its capitulation, Toot Toot opted to burrow itself into the earth, groveling in remorse for its previous actions. Lulu seems to have a firm understanding of the circumstances. After receiving a death threat, Tut Tut's behavior has become much more human-like. Upon closer inspection of the gifts, Lulu ascertained that they were not fruit. They are tubers. This could imply that Tut Tut metamorphosed from a potato into a monster. While Lei Ching swiftly recuperated, she was occupied with pairing the offerings, searching for some unaffected by the weed killer. Noticing a promising specimen, she opted to excise a minuscule fragment. She then placed the tiny morsel in her mouth for a taste test, much to Liang Yin's dismay. As she nibbled on the small piece, he hastily rushed to her side, attempting to verify its non-toxicity. It possessed a recognizable flavor and was safe to consume. It would be preferable to prepare it first. Aside from that, it earned Lulu's complete endorsement. He remained apprehensive about lingering toxins, however. Should she exhibit any initial symptoms of poisoning, he'd instantly administer soil orally. His anxiety stemmed from a desire to extract the poison. Despite her not having ingested anything, she had one final caution for Tut Tut. The plant would be forbidden from absorbing ground nutrients. It could only do so with Lee Chung-Yoon's explicit permission, given Tut-Tut's receptive demeanor. This could be deemed a successful domestication. He had another inquiry for the avaricious plant. He sought to know what it extracted from the deceased humans. It was a shadowy material, Darksiders. We'll call it dark element. Lokili, tut possessit certain abilities. It conjured a small sphere of dark element from thin air. Lee Chung-Yoon was gratified. He promptly extended his hand to examine the dark element. Upon closer inspection, the sphere's energy dissipated instantly and surged through him like a jolt of electricity. Unfamiliar voices suddenly filled his ears, a chorus of whispers originating from above. They discussed the sun's recent altered state and the arrival of an intruder. Tut-Tut continued its repetitive vocalization, but Lee Chung-Yi began deciphering its communication style. Tut-Tut inquired about the palatability of dark element. It seems he now comprehends the flora upon his person. Is this transformation a consequence of the dark element? The blossom confirmed its influence. The dark element metamorphoses those aligned with darkness. It amplifies their power. Speaking of amplified power, we shall soon witness the outcome, now that an unwelcome visitor has infiltrated their domain. Another adherent of darkness, with a physique seemingly composed entirely of timber, erupts onto the scene. Lee Kun-Yin sensed its approach from afar. He didn't even glance back. His watchful gaze spanned the entire territory he commanded. The unfortunate Darksider didn't have a moment to boast before being pierced by a volley of earthen spears. Lulu, startled, failed to detect the approaching adversary. He reassured her, "Don't fret. The flora alerted me to this Darksider's presence beforehand, having absorbed the shadowy essence." His dominion over the terrain grew exponentially. He offered the hapless Darksider just 3 words, whose ambush had miserably failed. "Rest in peace." He then manipulated the earth beneath the creature's feet, and Lee Chung effectively consumed the wood guy, leaving nothing behind. Henceforth, another Darksider became a permanent fixture, nourishing the land. As he intensified his subterranean grip, an ominous smoky formation began to materialize in the air. He channeled the unfettered energy into himself, confirming the presence of the dark element within every Darksider. Even if eliminated, the shadowy energy doesn't vanish instantly. This implies that continuous absorption of the dark mist will undeniably augment his power. Thus, he and Luluo would have a considerably improved chance of survival. She could finally respire freely. Her sole concern was his welfare. Observing his vacant expression, she assumed Tut-Tut had harmed him somehow. Speaking of Tut-Tut, this entity harbors certain views about Luluo as well. Individuals are expected to fear those aligned with darkness, but she doesn't given that. The blossom was intrigued by her effortless acceptance of the present circumstance. With such ease, she attempted to clarify that it stemmed from her upbringing amidst the earth. She's essentially acquainted with all things agrarian. Tut-Tut suggested imparting dark elements to Lee Chung-Yin, enabling their coexistence. The small flower possesses human-level intellect in the realm of intelligence. Perhaps it's due to its substantial consumption of essence from dark entities. Tutu dislikes physical contact, however. Changjin authorized the cohabitation strategy. This also grants him greater authority over the nutrients within his territory. But first, he required some information. Initially, he inquired about the origin of the minuscule sphere of dark energy Tut-Tut had encountered. It instantly replied that it originated from the light, as if it were universally understood. Beneath the constant radiance of the celestial eclipse, illumination is abundant. The pair only just realized that the eclipse was connected to this enigmatic dark energy. He promptly directed Luluo to seek refuge in the shadow of a tree, shielded from the light. Fortunately, she had remained concealed while fleeing. In this scenario, humanity's metamorphosis wasn't an isolated incident. It was a continuous process still unfolding. That puzzling, the perpetual night holds the answer to comprehending the cataclysm and the presence of the power supply for the malevolent forces. This would represent a substantial setback for Pingchen. Dr. Liu voices her apprehension regarding the perils lurking within the ancient remains. Meanwhile, it's said that the elemental entities overcome opponents. However, victory isn't assured without eliminating them. Shu, who becomes apprehensive if the Tamar's strength falters. Considering this the worst possible outcome isn't just risky, it's potentially lethal. Lu provides him with a website address and an invitation, a QR code offering price reductions and bonuses on cultivation supplies. She aims to encourage him to utilize the available provisions. She emphasizes that these assets will aid his rapid advancement to become a proficient tamer. Lu recommends Shu, who temporarily disregard the Ice Dragon ruins and concentrates solely on the uncharted realm. Yet, it appears she's the one repeatedly mentioning them. Department 11's latest edition begins to perceive the mission as excessively perilous. He conveniently overlooks that it's a component of the evaluation. To become an official representative of the group, his primary objective within the ruins is to unveil Glacier City's authentic past. Lu assures him that complete exploration of the ruins isn't necessary. To accomplish this, given his auditory acuity, Lulu was entrusted with evaluating the surrounding terrain. Their chosen location boasts fertile soil, secure topography, and a readily available water source. She was resolved to establish this area as the group's permanent sanctuary. Lai Chungan chuckled. The young lady certainly knows her craft. Her judgment was unquestionable, so he concurred. Abruptly, he detected something peculiar nearby. A faint rosy glimmer had adhered to Luluo. It was minuscule, practically invisible. It was a minute particle of shadowy energy. He delicately removed the fragment from her garment and cautioned her. There's insufficient protection from the sun's rays. Luluo must remain mindful not to wander too far from him. This was the crux of their accord. Ultimately, Lai Chunin didn't wish to witness her transform into a creature like himself. Due to the shadowy element, she became flustered upon hearing this. Luluo dislikes it when he calls himself a monstrous being. In her perspective, he has consistently been human. Tut silently observed the peculiar human exchange, failing to grasp the underlying meaning of their words. One can't anticipate a leguminous plant to decipher human sentiments. Lulu awkwardly shifted the conversation and displayed the seeds she deemed should be sown first. Among her provisions, these were the prized, rapidly maturing, edible harvests. Procuring sustenance is paramount for survival. Following the sowing, Lai Chun-in could be entrusted with tending the planted seeds. He grasped the seeds in his hand and commenced encasing them with a measured quantity of shadowy element. Our protagonist has been undergoing expansion, gradually supplanting the terrain beneath him. But prior to attaining complete dominion over this territory, experimenting with cultivation on himself would take precedence. Despite being mere seedlings, he sensed their yearning to flourish in ideal circumstances. The sensation was familiar, reminiscent of absorbing shadowy energies. He began to grasp the mindset of botanical life. Nevertheless, its effectiveness on seeds was surprising. Furthermore, it remains enigmatic. Yet he seemingly can communicate his intentions directly to plant life. After immersing the seeds in dark essence, they sprouted within his hands. Lulu was astonished by the rapid growth. They had just sown them moments ago, and already they exhibited signs of vitality. Moreover, the absorption felt completely natural. Therefore, this technique seemed viable. His hypothesis was that after assimilating a sufficient quantity of dark energy, he had unlocked this inherent aptitude. For experimental purposes, he depleted his entire reserve of dark energy, converting it into a force that accelerated plant development. He acted purely on instinct. Unexpectedly, Tut was vying for his attention. He was completely clueless about what was happening. It turned out the flower simply craved a bit of tender, loving care. Li Chung wasn't entirely averse to the notion. However, unless Tut fully obeyed his commands, the flower could continue dreaming. There's no such thing as a complimentary meal. And likewise, nurturing comes at a price. The flower bowed once more. Darksider truly has a knack for adapting to any circumstance. The first time Lua encountered Tut, she sensed this entity grasped human behavior. Since the eclipse ushered in the rise of dark elements, Li Chungian has been on a quest to expand his land cultivation practices. His goals are to increase territory and assimilate dark elements. The power derived from darkness provides him with a continuous flow of unique energy, an energy capable of being converted into beneficial effects. Through this remarkably positive feedback loop, Lin Chengyuan successfully cultivated a thriving farm. This was his greatest accomplishment. Following his unexpected meeting with Luluo, he mutters this to himself. Deep down, however, he recognized this as mere self-encouragement. Amidst the apocalyptic chaos, another notion surfaced in his mind. If his territory could safeguard humanity, he he might recapture a semblance of his former human existence. At his core, Lee Chung-yong yearned to revert to an ordinary human. In this contemporary world of creatures and metamorphoses, perhaps a means of reversing time existed. These were ambitious aspirations, though. Tut-Tut had incessantly reminded him since their initial introduction. He inquired of the blossom if it disliked the company of its own species. Rather than responding, Tut-Tut simply alerted him to approaching activity, emanating from actual humans, like Lulu-O. Naturally, Lee Chung-yong was astonished. This was significant news. However, Tut-Tut, he also noted, a sizable contingent of dark element wielders in the vicinity, and they're on the move. The reported human activity originated from a trio. Escaping through the forest, a Darksider was in pursuit. This Darksider is a formidable adversary. It has developed numerous razor-sharp protrusions covering its body. The humans were becoming exhausted. They've been running for their lives for quite some time, but their cries and complaints will only attract more. Darksiders, a seemingly reliable man, was leading the group of three. He faulted the pink-haired woman, Lu Fengyuan, for her insistence on returning to find Luluo. After they received a distress signal, Qingweng, the reliable fellow, was rather callous, but his point was valid. The bespectacled, nerdy boy was beginning to lag behind. The bladed Darksider was right on their tail, rapidly gaining ground. Then he faltered, glasses glanced back, and recoiled at the thought of being sliced and diced into ground meat. A fleeting lapse in attention allowed the Darksider to swing its weapon, but it narrowly missed Glass Boy's leg by a hair's breadth. The initial strike failed to connect, but the subsequent one might. Glass Boy had stumbled, falling face first onto the earth. Chung-Yung, the Glass Boy, was practically doomed at that moment. His companion was utterly powerless to assist him. Just as the blade Darksider lunged to strike, Chung-Jun was already offering his final prayers, convinced that his end had arrived. He was truly finished. Li, Fengyuan, and Qingwen observed helplessly, as their comrade was on the verge of death. But just as the blade's tip was about to disfigure the nerd's face, it halted. In fact, the Darksider's entire form was immobilized. It craned its neck, having detected the one who halted its blade. Li Chungzun subtly commanded the earth to seize the creature's leg. He'd also caught the human's prior mention of Lula. Perhaps they shared some connection with the girl. There was only one method to ascertain the truth. He had to rescue them, the young man. Li Chung-yun firmly grasped the blade Darksider by its feet, providing the nerd boy a chance to retreat from the deadly edge. His companions were utterly incompetent. The blade Darksider attempted to swivel its hideous, spider-like countenance to identify its captor, all while babbling incoherently, unable to discern who held it fast, at least within the constraints of normal vision. It contorted its head a full 180 degrees, resembling a scene from an exorcism film. This action revealed to it the personification of the very ground beneath them. Li Ching-yin, the malevolent force, swiftly redirected his attention to assault him. He wielded his blades with unrestrained ferocity. He anticipated the assault from afar, yet he made no attempt to evade it. He didn't resort to elaborate defenses against the weapon's point. Li Shenlin opted to gather intel by analyzing the creature's actions. Based on his informed deduction, this entity shouldn't possess the capacity for communication. After all, it's the one encroaching upon his territory. Not only does it fail to express remorse, but it even assaults him with a smug grin. Li Shenlin resolved to impart a lesson upon this Darksider. It's justifiable considering this is literally his domain. With a mere thought, he caused the ground beneath the monster to cave in, forming a sizable sinkhole. That's one method Li Ching-yin can manipulate his physical form. From a human observer's standpoint, the shadowy figure abruptly darted in the reverse direction, lashing out at the vacant air, only to be ensnared by an unforeseen mishap. At the very least, they were unharmed. Mere moments ago, the timid youth believed his demise was imminent, a grisly end, mutilated by the shadowy figure's blades. However, an unexpected rockslide delivered him from peril. The rose-haired young woman, Lu Fengyuan, detected an unusual phenomenon from a distance. Filled with vibrant curiosity and eagerness, she observed intently. She gestured towards the opposite side of a precipice, where smoke ascended skyward. If a smoke signal was discernible from their current location, the vantage point they occupied, it must have been ignited by fellow survivors from their nightmarish academy. Perhaps even Lulu herself. Thus, the trio pinpointed their subsequent destination. Regaining their composure, they embarked on another journey towards the smoke. This would represent a substantial setback for Pingchen. Dr. Lu voices her apprehension regarding the perils lurking within the ancient remains. Meanwhile, it's said that the elemental entities overcome opponents. However, victory isn't assured without eliminating them. Shu, who becomes apprehensive if the Tamar's strength falters. Considering this the worst possible outcome isn't just risky, it's potentially lethal. Lu provides him with a website address and an invitation, a QR code offering price reductions and bonuses on cultivation supplies. She aims to encourage him to utilize the available provisions. She emphasizes that these assets will aid his rapid advancement to become a proficient tamer. Lu recommends Shu, who temporarily disregard the Ice Dragon ruins and concentrates solely on the uncharted realm. Yet, it appears she's the one repeatedly mentioning them. Department 11's latest edition begins to perceive the mission as excessively perilous. He conveniently overlooks that it's a component of the evaluation. To become an official representative of the group, his primary objective within the ruins is to unveil Glacier City's authentic past. Lu assures him that complete exploration of the ruins isn't necessary. To accomplish this, given his auditory acuity, concerning the broader implications of the situation, this worry also extends to Li Chenyan's team. Speaking of companions, Lu has finally rejoined her comrades. Tut was simply apprehensive about the possibility of these people attempting to compete for their sustenance. Should that occur, what course of action can they take? Harmonious relationships like Tut's aren't universally attainable. Tut and Lulu, also known as his parasitic growths, reassured the peculiar Bloom that there was no cause for alarm. He vowed to act decisively when necessary, regardless of the source or nature of the danger. The energetic Lu Feng Yuan couldn't keep her hands off Luluo. She embraced her tightly, rejoicing in her friend's well-being. Losing contact had terrified her. Suddenly, Luluo had to soothe the exuberant girl. The embrace had become prolonged and constricting. Luo Fengwan was simply grateful that Qinwen and Changjun had accompanied her to this remote region. Had she ventured out alone, she'd have been unable to locate her emerald-haired companion. Qinwen sarcastically remarked that Luo barely survived on her own, owing to some inexplicable stroke of luck. Changjun was astonished she constructed a respectable refuge, as if intending to remain concealed there indefinitely. Mr. Negativity. Qinwen declared that remaining hidden long-term was unsustainable. Mere moments ago, they encountered a malevolent entity and narrowly escaped annihilation. He was convinced the area was utterly treacherous. He urged Luo to accompany the group to the civil defense, a military stronghold within the city, where ample provisions were available for all survivors. Without the military bastion safeguarding the remaining populace, they were essentially sitting ducks, vulnerable to being pursued and eliminated by the Darksiders. Since the subject had been broached, Luo inquired about the current state of the external world. That inquiry nearly sent Qin into a tailspin, overwhelmed by the sheer terror of the situation. Monsters are rampant everywhere. The Darksiders have dominated. Over half of humanity has abruptly transformed into various monstrous creatures. They went berserk, assaulting ordinary people. Chaos reigns supreme, and order has vanished. Most inhabitants of the safe havens are too afraid to venture outside. Witnessing the sheer horror, they can only cower in the civil defense fortress, hoping for the uncertain arrival of reinforcements. Qinwen states this, yet he desperately tries to pull Luluo into that wretched place, even resorting to tugging her arm. Their survival thus far is solely due to Lu Fengwan's aerial drone, which detects the Darksiders' blind spots. No sane person would volunteer to jeopardize their life on such a perilous rescue endeavor. He fancies himself her valiant rescuer, aiming to whisk her away to what he perceives as sanctuary. Lulu's arm began to ache from the brute's forceful grip. He attempted to rip her from her chair. This Qinwen character exudes cette lignoha. Thus, Li Chengyi chose to intervene. Utilizing the mud walls, he nudged a bowl off the shelf. The earthenware struck Qinwen's shoulder, shattering into fragments. The surprise and discomfort loosened his hold on Lulua's arm. Lian Fengyuan stepped forward to protect her companion. To her knowledge, Qinwen hadn't previously displayed such aggression. He wasn't prone to lashing out in frustration, or anything of that nature. This further ignited Mr. Buzzkill's already volatile temper. He proclaimed he'd risked his neck searching for Luluah, and now this e-girl was berating him like a toddler. He warned that if she continued her incessant chatter and wavering, her fate is sealed. She will ultimately perish at the hands of the dark side. The geeky young Jun attempted to intercede. In a jesting manner, he playfully inquired if his companion's recent encounter with a Darksider had caused such agitation. To regain their composure, the men will step outside. Meanwhile, the women will gather their belongings and prepare for departure. Our innocent Luluah began to attribute blame to herself for Mr. Buzzkill's behavior. While Lu Fengyuan shot icy glares at the brute outside, Qinwen remained inexplicably enraged. From his perspective, the women failed to grasp the gravity of the escalating danger. He also lamented his own impetuous decision to participate in this suicidal endeavor. Chengju endeavored to remain composed and rational, cautioning Qin went against recklessness. Lulu had endured alone for so long that she might require time to process the current circumstances. Assuming the large man was merely famished, he offered him some roasted potatoes that Lulu had personally prepared. The return journey will be even more arduous. Therefore, they should at least replenish their energy with sustenance first. Qinwen seized the potato as if it were his birthright. He declared that this was the natural order of things, that he was entitled to provisions first. This audacious act didn't go unnoticed by the watchful eyes of the land. Lai Chunjian and Tut Tut discreetly observed the altercation from a distance. They patiently awaited the unfolding events. Apeplex Tut Tut inquired if this was typical human interaction. Lai Chunjian responded in the negative. Human conduct cannot be universally categorized. Tut Tut's only conclusion is that he's witnessing an unappreciative and insensitive ruffian, a prime candidate for guilt-free nutrient theft. Those individuals are even consuming the potato stalks that he diligently cultivated. Currently, based on the proprietor's assessment, these individuals are not prospective allies, capable of remaining and collaborating. They are acquainted with Luluah. Their express purpose was to escort her away, leaving no opportunity for dissent. If their true intention is to take Luluah, and she desires to accompany them, should Lai Cheng-in intervene and obstruct their path? Does he possess the authority to meddle in Luluah's choice? Tut Tut was accustomed to acting on impulse. He questioned the relevance of such inquiries. As a former human, these matters hold significance for Lai Cheng-in, far more significant than Tut Tut's potatoes. Disregarding the subject of potato cuttings, the sarcastic Bloom has unearthed a more crucial revelation. The three humans journeyed a great distance, yet they bear no trace of dark energy. If they endured prolonged exposure to the outside world, where did the dark elements vanish? Lai Cheng-in grasped the gravity of this observation, and it was a chilling one. After the boys finished the potatoes outside, Young Jun inquired if Mr. Buzzkill's disposition had improved after consuming some sustenance. Meanwhile, our brainy friend will check on the ladies. Perhaps they're ready to depart. But Qinwen is an ungrateful chap. Instead of expressing gratitude to Luluah for the spuds, he rejected them as if provisions weren't scarce. He asserted that it was the most repulsive potato he'd ever encountered. Jingjin disagreed. His potatoes were perfectly fine. Perhaps the big fellow was experiencing some anxiety. The term anxiety didn't sit well with Jinwen. He confessed his concern for everyone's well-being. Wouldn't he be apprehensive otherwise? He clenched his fist tightly, veins bulging. They're amidst an apocalypse teeming with creatures. His sole desire is to protect everyone. His expression contorted into a hideously unpleasant, malevolent scowl as he angrily questioned why his companions persistently compelled him to undertake challenging tasks. Within the earthen dwelling, Lu Fengyan proudly displayed the farming drone, which she'd acquired from the university's Department of Animal Sciences. At their college, remember, folks, appropriation is perfectly acceptable in the apocalypse. The drone also possesses an infrared functionality, utilizing it to guide the group back to the civilian shelter. Reaching the military stronghold shouldn't pose a difficulty. They can simply navigate a route avoiding Darksider territories. She'd been chattering for quite some time, but she observed that Lulu appeared less than enthusiastic about exiting the wilderness. Thus, she inquired about her companion's specific concerns. What on earth could make her so reluctant to re-enter society? Lulu offered an uneasy smile, uncertain how to respond. Earlier, Lechingen had merely stated his desire to assess the outside world's circumstances. But how should Luluah proceed in this predicament? Her friend wishes her to accompany the rescue team back to the city. She worried that departing without bidding farewell to her rescuer, Lee Chung-yun, would be furious with her lack of gratitude. Jung-eun and the perpetually gloomy man re-entered the earthen house. The studious young man inquired if Luo was now mentally ready to depart. He assumed her fears stemmed solely from encountering malevolent entities outside. Lulu firmly stated that this was not the situation. She contemplated revealing the truth about her circumstances, but worried that Lu Fanyuan and the others would deem her delusional. Internally, she was in a state of frantic turmoil. She wished Lee Chung-yun would intervene and resolve her current dilemma. She longed for the landlord's guidance. The irascible Chin Wen's patience finally reached its limit. He declared that he had had enough. They had squandered sufficient time already. If Luo refused to depart, he would resort to binding her and taking her by force. Further delay, he argued, would jeopardize everyone's well-being. He viewed Luo's hesitation as a symptom of her, declaring the trio's fate insignificant. Leon Fengyuan defended her companion, inquiring if the brute's feeble mind had finally crumbled. Had he lost his sanity? Chin-wen lacked the composure to even reason with a friend. He seemed like a different Chin-wen entirely. His outlandish assumptions lacked any foundation. Every time he spoke, death was his sole topic. If he feared death so intensely, he shouldn't have joined the rescue operation. Lu Fengyuan was on a tear. Then, she questioned if Mr. Buskill considered himself a messiah. Did he believe that without his intellect, doom awaited everyone else? His darkening countenance suggested. The e-girl's words struck a nerve. She assumed control, insisting Chung-young adhere to their strategy. Miss E-girl would venture out to deploy the drone, while the tech-savvy one ensured the perimeter was secure. Her confidence readily swayed the bespectacled one. Leo Fengyuan addressed Chin-wen one final time, imploring him to snap out of it and avoid becoming a liability, hindering the team's progress. Unbeknownst to the others, a shadowy presence within Mr. Negative's being yearned for release. Forced to confront his anxieties with a dose of reality, only exacerbated the situation. The strategy unfolded as planned. Lu Fangguan deployed her UAV to reconnoiter the vicinity. From the aerial vantage point, they selected a suitable clearing for takeoff. The wind conditions were ideal. Departure was imminent. Grasping the controls and preparing to don the headset, the return trip to the settlement appeared effortless. Lu Fanyuan optimistically anticipated an unobstructed homeward journey. She hoped no adversaries would impede their return. Finally, they launched the unmanned aircraft. It rapidly soared skyward to chart the most secure route possible for the team. Everything was proceeding smoothly until it abruptly wasn't. A darn grappling hook, aimed squarely at the drone, was launched skyward to obliterate it into smithereens. Debris rained down upon the individuals below. Lao Fengyuan removed the deactivated monitor mask. This was completely unexpected, leaving Nerd Boy and E-Girl utterly astonished. Whirling towards the origin of the grappling hook, they spotted Chin Wen's imposing figure emerging from the mud dwelling. One arm was outstretched, resembling a cord. His hand morphed into the shape of the grappling hook. He repeatedly insisted that the Darksiders were culpable. The grappling hook, along with the extended rope, swiftly retracted. Chin Wen frenziedly proclaimed that he alone could deliver them all from the Darksiders. He demanded their obedience if they desired salvation. Lulu remained within the house, in closest proximity to the lunatic. She lacked a clear view of his features. Thus, she couldn't ascertain if he had fully succumbed to darkness. The shadowy obscurity on his face and the intense gleam in his eyes all but confirmed it. However, the peculiar thing was Chin Wen insisted he was merely safeguarding the team. From his viewpoint, they were the ones who misunderstood, recognizing that he was beyond redemption. Lulu attempted to dash past him, fleeing through the exit with all her might. Driven by desperation and terror, she successfully escaped, putting considerable distance between herself and the partially metamorphosed Darksider. She raced to alert the others of Chin Wen's descent into wickedness. Hookshot Boy still possessed enough sense to feel unjustly treated by the betrayal of his supposed ally. His words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Lulu even fled from him as if he were a terrifying creature. So, like a perfectly rational individual, he proclaimed that everyone would perish at his hands. He prepared his grappling hook arm for another launch. Before Chin Wen could unleash his hook shot, the earthen structure behind him began to spontaneously fracture. It crumbled unexpectedly, collapsing in a single swift motion. Massive fragments of solid rock piled atop the hook-shot-wielding Darksider. As Luluaw continued her escape, she glanced back briefly to witness the devastation. As usual, after witnessing something unpleasant, Luluaw's initial reaction was to assume responsibility. Chongjun and Lu Fengyuan were also unharmed. Due to their distance from the collapse, both were perplexed, since Qinwen had never directly encountered Darksiders before. They hadn't even accounted for such an unforeseen factor in their escape strategy. Ms. E-Girl, she shook off her bewilderment and swiftly grasped the astonished Lulu from her fearful position. She remained the only one composed. She understood that a Darksider wasn't like a cinematic zombie. Moreover, they were clueless about these creatures' mutations. She also implored the geek to flee, unless he believed he could combat a Darksider. The menacing hook, previously launched from the ruined house, erupted from the wreckage. It zeroed in on the escaping group. Fortunately, Luluaw glanced back in a frenzy, warning the hook's intended victim, Lu Fengyuan, to evade. Miss E-Girl also spun around, observing the pointed, metallic point poised to impale her. However, before the hook neared, a chunk of earth abruptly materialized, arresting the hook's seemingly unstoppable force. Rather than piercing the E-Girl's slender form, it was thwarted by some earth-manipulating magic. Lu Fengyuan observed the stationary metal point, shimmering with reflected sunlight. Had the earth not intervened, she would have perished. She would have been finished. The weapon's hook was firmly embedded in the stone, but tremors emanated from the rope's opposite end, where the earthen dwelling had crumbled. Utilizing the elastic rope's resilience, retracting to its initial length, Qinwen, the Darksider, emerged from the debris unharmed. He continued ranting about the Darksider's culpability, attributing the entire situation to them. His other hand clenched into a fist, also undergoing a strange transformation. His flesh acquired unusual properties. Qinwen rambled incessantly about the group's dependence on him, claiming their survival hinged on his assistance. An unseen force halted his enlarged fist before it contacted the other survivors. Judging by their size alone, it appeared to be a completely uneven match, but the unseen force remained firm. Li Qingyan finally materialized at the opportune moment. His physique mirrored the earthen barrier that initially halted the grappling hook. This was his inaugural observation of a human's transformation into a monstrous being, a Darksider. He had to concede that this Qinwen fellow possessed a certain uniqueness. Mr. Grappling Hook, the Darksider, was still conscious of the interference with his assault. He sensed it, yet he couldn't perceive the landlord's figure, as far as Qinwen knew. Though the enigmatic presence seemed part of the terrain, a distinct sentience was evident. Why then would a non-human impede him? Inside Qinwen's distorted mind, he believed he was merely safeguarding the group. So, how could he be at fault? Li Qingyan inquisitively inquired if this was accurate. In that scenario, he and Qinwen might share common ground. He inquired if the former Mr. Buzzkill could retain his human identity, even after undergoing transformation. Qinwen replied that he and the 3 other survivors were classmates, companions, comrades. Those fundamental truths would remain constant. He desperately yearned to rescue them, but his desire manifested in a distorted manner. He perpetually reassured himself of his ability to save everyone, believing this was the sole solution. As a mutated being himself, Lacanian's intuition suggested the man wasn't being deceptive, or rather, he believed his words and actions to be unequivocally true. If that were so, given his compatibility with Lu Luo, why not Qinwen? Perhaps the answer resided in their eyes. The imprint of animosity and malevolence was evident in Qinwen's gaze. The dark entity's remaining arm completed its metamorphosis, materializing as numerous pliable cords, possessing exceptional resilience. They effortlessly pierced Li Qinyan's earthen barrier. These tendrils ensnared the unfortunate Yongjun. They failed to flee when the opportunity arose. Now the geek was facing the consequences. Li Qing turned to assess the inflicted harm, having neglected the other transformed appendage. Despite his earthen defense, Shining's metamorphosis neared completion. Every vestige of humanity vanished from his face, supplanted by the grotesque visage of a Darksider. He rambled about his companion's corruption, by the shadowy element, and his obligation to eradicate the tainted, to ultimately deliver them. The nerdy Chongyun was stunned by his close companion's treachery, still incredulous that Qinwen had become his executioner. The unfortunate soul perished just like that, slain by his closest friend, now a monstrous being. In the ensuing moment, Yoongjun's lifeless body plummeted towards the earth. Lu Fengyuan could only cry out his name in anguish, but his efforts were futile. Yoongjun was deaf to all sounds in this life. Her only regret was the choice to linger in this forsaken place. However, nothing could be altered. Now the girls had to prioritize their own survival and flee with utmost haste. Their lives depended on it, even with Yoongjun's demise. Darksider Chin was relentless. He was insatiable. He wouldn't allow his former companions to escape and forsake him. His warped mind believed only he could safeguard them, and if they refused his protection, then they were unworthy of life. The girls barely reached the precipice, but their efforts were in vain. The Darksiders' assault overtook them, and in a desperate bid to evade the strike, they leaped into the abyss. The cliff was treacherous, a dizzying drop of several dozen meters. Lu Fengyuan and Fei realized their end was imminent, and this would be their final resting place. She started blaming herself, holding herself responsible for jeopardizing everyone. After all, she was the one who launched the quest to locate Lilua. Despite the inherent peril, the transformation of humans into dark sides remained a mystery. Ultimately, she concluded it was her doing, her error. Her companions perished because of her choices. Resigned to her imminent demise, she closed her eyes, surrendering to destiny. To her astonishment, the anticipated impact never came. Instead, she and Lu Luo landed on a newly formed slope, tumbling down like children on a playground slide. Lu Fengyuan, utterly stunned by this unexpected twist, made the grave error of turning over. Now, she was plummeting face first, already reaching the bottom. She had to expel the dirt and grit from her mouth. Her face was now a canvas of scrapes and contusions. Still, this was infinitely preferable to death. Lu Fengyuan was in disbelief at her fortunate escape. Glancing back, she pondered why the landscape had abruptly transformed beneath them. It remained difficult for her to grasp how she'd endured such a plunge. Lulu swiftly embraced her companion and solicitously inquired about her well-being. However, Lu Fengyuan wasn't someone requiring solace. Her sole current interest was deciphering the unfolding events. Lulu was on the verge of explaining, despite the inherent implausibility. Her statement conveyed her certainty that fleeing wasn't advisable. After all, their champion was present. Li Chengyan, their hero, would undoubtedly resolve every issue. He would ensure their safety amidst the pervasive threats. Meanwhile, above, their protagonist was addressing the antagonist challenge. The transformed, chin-augmented foe expressed displeasure at a certain landmass, kept him apart from his companions, and fueled his longing for them. He yearned to continue rescuing them. The Darksider was poised to obliterate his adversary, the one obstructing his mission to deliver others. Naturally, our protagonist deemed such reasoning highly suspect. How could anyone entertain the notion that eliminating companions equated to salvation? Where was the logic in that? Li Chengyan was mistaken to believe negotiation was possible, and that's how Chung Yung met his demise. Our hero was too naive to consider Chin when might share his perspective and maintain a rational existence. Following the transformation, ultimately, Chinwen proved to be just another typical, run-of-the-mill, dim-witted Darksider, devoid of any human conscience. He possessed only the instinct to kill and engage in senseless rambling. Such an exceptionally detrimental creature could now be eradicated, without a shred of remorse. Sensing the impending confrontation, Li Chengyan braced for combat and unleashed his abilities. The antagonist stiffened, utterly. Astounded by the sheer volume of shadowy elements, he instantly launched an assault, aiming to rescue everyone. Regardless of his interpretation of those words, our protagonist attempted to block the hook's strike with his bare hand. Unfortunately, this proved to be a grave miscalculation. The hook effortlessly shattered his arm and pierced his torso. Li Chengyan was taken aback by the Dark Seer's immense power. Could this creature truly possess such might? After contemplation, our hero concluded it wasn't the case. Rather, he himself had grown excessively feeble. The explanation was quite straightforward. The terrain in this mountainous region was excessively rocky with minimal soil. Although he'd transported some of his earth here, the quantity of soil remained inadequate. Consequently, his strength was significantly diminished. Meanwhile, the dark entity was brimming with power and vitality. He persisted in his ranting, convinced that only he could deliver people, And this plot of Earth was a monstrous being. In a sense, our protagonist even pitted him. Now reduced to an ordinary denizen of darkness, he was utterly lost. Those subjected to the dark sun become corrupted by shadowy forces. The sole means of alleviating their torment is termination. After undergoing this transformation, those dwelling in darkness cannot reintegrate into human society. This is due to their altered appearance, ferocious demeanor, and absence of human sentience. Regardless of how it might seem, the only recourse for the darkness afflicted was to return to the shadows, to being similarly altered. Therefore, Li Qing's words served as a stark reminder to his adversary that he was adrift, without purpose or destination within the abyss of darkness. Though our hero was also touched by darkness, he was distinct from the rest, for he had retained his intellect and awareness. Now, he resolved to extend a final act of compassion to the entity that was once Shin when, and lay him to rest, ending his torment. Naturally, the beast resisted such compassion, determined to prolong its agony in this world. It whirled its hook, transforming it into a whirling blade to shred its adversary. But Li Qing didn't remain passive. He readied his own countermeasure. Utilizing rapidly expanding roots, the hook failed to shatter his hands this time. Moreover, it couldn't even graze them. The roots effectively shielded him. Of course, there was a price to pay. Now, our protagonist had to employ plants symbiotically linked to him. He lamented the harm inflicted upon them, but vanquishing the malevolent entity was paramount. Afterward, he would lavishly compensate them for their aid. Now, bolstering his terrestrial form with roots, Li Qing effortlessly severed his opponent's arm without a hitch. The dark sider instantly bellowed in anguish and fury, rising to its feet, paused briefly to regain his composure. He appeared to have conceded, ready to flee, but this impression was fleeting. The fury and animosity consuming him erupted, and he launched an assault with his free hand. Suddenly, Lulu's cries echoed from behind as she ascended the precipice once more. Disregarding the peril, she carried a backpack containing a vital instrument. She hastily tossed it to our protagonist, urging him to utilize it. Li Qing wheeled around, narrowly escaping the creature's clutches. He swiftly snatched the object, precisely what he required. Sturdy, razor-sharp pruning shears. These alone might have sufficed, but our hero had other intentions. Li Qing resolved to amplify them, infusing them with terrestrial might and botanical resilience. He would meld this with the keen edge of the steel implements, forging the ultimate armament. He now possessed a formidable force. The wooden Darksider was utterly incapable of withstanding it, regardless of his efforts or his resentment. The moment had arrived to unleash this newfound weapon. The Darksider was relentlessly persistent. As he pressed his attack, Li Qing simply offered a smug grin. The fool was oblivious to his inevitable defeat. With a single decisive strike, he obliterated the Darksider's second arm. Splintered wood scattered in every direction. Our protagonist pressed his advantage, launching his own assault. Now bereft of both hands, his opponent was vulnerable to a devastating blow to the head. The Darksider collapsed helplessly, his dark mask fractured. Armless and helpless, he couldn't rise, nor would Li Qing permit it. Looming over the monster, he placed his blade against its throat. The forces of darkness had been vanquished. Tut materialized instantly from the earth. Once the threat subsided, he critiqued our protagonist's armament, deeming it inadequately resilient. Although fairly sturdy, amidst his pointed commentary, was the practical suggestion to inter the dark entity in the soil, to draw sustenance from it, following nature's fundamental principle. Naturally, the dark being wasn't thrilled with this proposition. In a desperate act, it spewed more gibberish before being entombed underground. Li Qing posed a final inquiry. What led him down this path? He merely reiterated his desire to deliver people. This prompted our hero to contemplate whether Wen's transformation wasn't solely attributed to the dark sun's influence. Perhaps his persistent apprehension lured him toward darkness. The soil and roots beneath Li Qing commenced absorbing the creature. The earth would handle him and provide sanctuary, guaranteeing no further casualties at the hands of a supposed champion of camaraderie like this one. When composure and rationality finally returned, only two modest earthen mounds remained by the precipice. Lu Fengyuan gazed at them with sorrow. Tears weren't falling, but she was barely keeping it together. Her dearest companions had perished in an instant. Only Lulua remained, For Lulua's well-being, she had to find strength. Observing her despondency, Lulua sought to console her and divert her attention by acquainting her with Li Changyin. However, there was a minor complication, which our protagonist hastily brought to her attention. His form was scarcely visible, but he possessed a remedy for this predicament. It remained to be seen if Lu Fengyuan could perceive his voice. He wished to inquire if she resented his intrusive presence. He was acutely aware of his blunder. Were it not for his hesitation, Zhongjun might still be among the living, and Qinwen would have been subdued more swiftly. Had our protagonist not instilled false hope regarding Darksiders, he could have managed this predicament more effectively. Unexpectedly, Lu Fengyuan countered that she disagreed and held no resentment towards him. He must be foolish to concoct such a notion. In reality, upon emerging from the civilian sanctuary, she had braced herself for a similar conclusion. Even if the most dreadful fate befell her, she would solely attribute blame to herself. However, Lulu wasn't astonished by her statement, but by her ability to perceive Lechengen's utterances. Thus, she inquired as to how this was possible. The answer to this query eluded her. But for some inexplicable reason, following Changyuan's memorial service, she distinctly sensed the presence of another individual nearby, despite being unable to visually perceive him. Now, aided by the image derived from the earth, a peculiar communicative device materialized before her, resembled a discarded clay figurine repeatedly shattered and coated in grime. That's essentially how our protagonist appeared from her vantage point. Lulu also divulged a curious detail about Li Chengyan, that he himself is a conscious Darksider transformed into a plot of earth, and he has a companion, an amiable plant Darksider named Tut Tut. Their existence was difficult to fathom, and other survivors would undoubtedly scoff upon encountering such a notion. But now, the pair had witnessed them firsthand, and couldn't dispute it. Lu Fengyuan remained deeply saddened, and even the peculiar presence of two sapient Darksiders failed to divert her attention. Lulu proposed she remain with them and reside there, but she wasn't inclined to immediately concur. She required time for contemplation and repose. She intended to disclose her determination to them the following day. Lua was feeling utterly drained. She requested lodging for the night at their residence. As anticipated, Lua was devastated by the loss of her companions, and Lua felt concerned for her well-being. She felt certain about spending the evening with her, to provide comfort and reassurance. Our protagonist welcomed the extra companionship. The evening passed swiftly. The girls reveled in their shared company, worn out from the day's anxieties, promptly drifted off to sleep. However, something felt amiss. Lulu was trembling. She was unwell, suffering from a fever. Outside, our hero, unburdened by the need for slumber, gazed at the heavens, contemplating the days ahead. Niabi, toot toot toot, pondered if the increase in human companions was permanent or merely a temporary arrangement. Lekung couldn't be certain. Since the dark sun's descent, all communication had been severed, and the reconnaissance drone was obliterated. In this scenario, if Lu Fengyuan is as astute as she claims, she wouldn't embark on a perilous solo expedition. Tut Tut possessed a limited grasp of human conduct. Thus, he inquired if she knew of a more secure dwelling. So, why did she venture here? Her actions appeared utterly illogical to him. The explanation was straightforward: to rescue her companion. This demonstrated her virtuous nature. And Li Chengyan desired to provide sanctuary only for the righteous within his domain. To Tut Tut, this clarification remained inadequate. He was baffled by their behavior. He stated that the thinking, expressions, and conduct of creatures are often enigmatic. In contrast to Flora, the subsequent morning was anything but tranquil and peaceful. It commenced with Lu Fengyuan's cries, who inquired of Lulua what had befallen her. Li Chengyan rushed towards her screams to ascertain the situation. However, Lu Fengyuan couldn't articulate what had transpired. Lulua suffered from a high fever, but its origin remained unclear. The possibilities were numerous. Perhaps an allergic reaction to an insect's bite, a parasitic contamination, or even blood poisoning. Lulu herself suspected it was due to exhaustion and a resulting weakened immune response. Moreover, she had been fiercely battling for survival over the past several days. Her mental state was incredibly strained. She was convinced that some rest would remedy the situation, and everything would be all right. Lu Fengyuan refused to dismiss the matter. Deeply concerned for her companion, she was determined to facilitate her recovery. Based on the indications, Lulua required antibacterial medication, which they unfortunately lacked. To acquire them, A return trip to the civilian refuge was necessary. The location wasn't distant. A round trip would require less than a day's travel, and Li Fengyuan readily embarked on this perilous expedition. Meanwhile, Luluo required constant supervision and care. She entrusted these responsibilities to our protagonist. As she prepared to depart from their dwelling, Li Chengyan halted her, reminding her that she couldn't safely navigate this wilderness. Unaccompanied, without a reconnaissance drone, he vowed to protect her if he could accompany her. But unfortunately, his mobility was restricted to this terrain. Venturing beyond it would prove too sluggish. Luluo couldn't endure such a delay. The journey's perils didn't deter Lu Fengyuan. She was prepared to face the hazards alone. Life held no meaning without her companions. Thus, she was ready to risk everything to rescue Luluo. Witnessing her resolve, our hero chose to intervene and assist. In a flash, he ripped out his own eye. Such an abrupt action startled Li Fengyuan. She was completely baffled by his motive. Frankly, even Li Chengyan was uncertain of his own intentions. His sole desire was to verify his suspicions. With all his strength, he hurled his eye skyward. Unfamiliar with his transformed body, he had to personally investigate everything. Remarkably, his hypothesis was proven correct. The Earth fragment detached from him could, in fact, retain a portion of his awareness. However, this lasted only briefly. Mere seconds later, his eye transformed into an earthen shard, completely severed from him. But Tut understood how to transcend even this constraint. He simply needed to imbue the earthen piece with dark energy. Tut himself, operating under the same principle, moved like a beast. He could detach from the ground by dispersing shadowy elements. Intrigued, our protagonist pondered what quantity of dark elements would be required to detach a fragment of earth from itself. For a full day, while maintaining constant perception, certainly no small feat. Tut attempted a rough estimation and froze in place upon grasping the immense expenditure required. But gazing at Lulu's sickbed, ridden with fever, Tut bravely inquired if he were to fall ill, would similar resources be expended for his recovery? Li Cheng reassured him, pledging his utmost effort. It was only natural after all. They were now a symbiotic unit, obligated to care for one another. Slowly, Tut grasped the situation and commenced accumulating dark elements. His roots, now liberated, prepared him to assist his companions. He ascended to gather and channel more energy. Lu Fengyuan marveled at his swift metamorphosis. Previously, this small bloom seemed innocuous. Tut acted swiftly and commenced saturating our hero's homeland with shadowy energy he'd personally siphoned from the sun and earth. This quantity should have sufficed for Li Cheng to detach a fragment of earth from his primary form, while maintaining consciousness for a complete 24 hours. The sound of energy coursing through him resembled the blips of resource generation in a video game. Li Cheng was astonished by Tut's extensive knowledge and pondered the alternative applications of dark energy. Was Tut truly utilizing it to enhance his intellect? In reality, he was merely observing and emulating our hero. And now, through this first-hand experience, he grasped the significance of camaraderie and companionship. Now, with urgency, Li Cheng hastened to depart swiftly, conserving valuable time. Tut had expended considerable energy and refused to let it be squandered. They needed to proceed expeditiously, but unforeseen perils and hazards might lie ahead.